Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here at WriteHive 2026. I am Patry Jones, your moderator for this particular workshop. I have the pleasure of being here with CM Rosens, and she's got a fabulous workshop set up on crafting a queer normative world. World building is everything for me. I always think of my worlds as characters, so I'm so excited to hear how we can ensure that we have a very queer normative world. To get us started, let me just introduce you to CMs. CMs is the pen name of a Welsh-Turkish genre-blending hybrid author of gothic horror, new weird, and dark science fiction fantasy based in the UK. You can often find her traveling by rail, wandering among lonely ruins and ancient megaliths, or lost in worlds of fiction, music, and folklore. She's an active member of the HWA and British Fantasy Society, and her work is published with Canelo Horror, Black Hair Press, and Red Cape Publishing, among other places. She's a multiple Indie Ink Awards nominee, and we are so feeling pleasured to have you here, CMs. Right? What I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and flip the switch over to you. Feel free to share your screen, and let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Patrick, for that wonderful introduction. I am CM Rosens. Welcome to Creating a Queer Normative World workshop. The quote on the front of this presentation is from one of my mutuals on Blue Sky, a very long-standing online friend, Tiernan Blanchard. And I think that just encapsulates exactly what we're trying to do here better than I could have done in a beautiful, succinct skeet, I suppose, instead of a tweet. So, yes, cultural apparatus is required in order to maintain societal norms and to construct them and to perpetuate them. And what we want to do is to reimagine cultural norms and cultural apparatus in order to create a queer normative world. So let's go on this journey. We're going to go back to basics. So the core of any society where you see ideals being shaped, reflected, and passed on is the family unit. And you can read quite a lot of sociological papers on this. It's really interesting. And family is presented often as the microcosm of society. It's where social ideals and norms and ideas are perpetuated, they are reflected back, they are often subverted, they can be places where they are places where you learn about what society wants you to be like. And you'll know because if your family does not conform to social norms, you will find that out quickly when you go outside of the family home. If your family does conform to societal norms, then those are the norms that you will absorb from a very early age. And it will take you a while potentially to find out that maybe those norms don't fit you. So, the family is really what we're looking at. And often I think when we're reading and writing queer books, sometimes you'll find that the norms of the writer are reflected in those books that we read and the books that we write. And so you'll often see societies where the only sort of families that you get mentioned, because we're focusing on the main characters, look like mum, dad, and kids. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. That's totally fine, totally valid. This is a queer normative society, not a queer, like everything society, right? There are going to be families that look like that. But it's just interesting to see, is that the norm? Or is that just a family that happens to exist in the society alongside other families that look very different? And like so what can we bring in? And again, just another little note here that the when we're looking for ways to create queer normative societies, we're looking at ways to adapt the family and to bring in sort of ideas that will give us this queer normative normalization of certain things. The difference between appropriation and appreciation. I think we need to think about that. So there's definitely ways that we can go back to our own heritage, our own history, and look at different aspects of society at different points in time that relate directly to us as well. Um, and think about how to project that into our own writing, think about how we can adapt that into our writing, and think about how we can sort of where we want to go with that. So I'm Welsh. I grew up in Wales all my life mostly. I've travelled around a bit. I've lived in different places. I've lived in Greece. My dad's family are all Turkish. They all live in Turkey, Turkey, I should say now. But I'm going to go back to Wales because I also have a PhD in medieval Wales from about 1100 to circa 1300. That's kind of my jam. That's where I'm based in my head always. You don't have to have a PhD in this. It's just this is just the level that I'm at. So I like to look at medieval history. I think um, I know that fantasy tends to be medieval heavy sometimes, but you don't need to use historical concepts specifically in fantasy. You can take that and you can put them into any time period. You can put that into sci-fi. You can put that into, far future, whatever you want. But I think it just it's a good place to start because it gives you some ideas about what you can adapt and what happened in the past and how we got here. Um, so we'll start with like medieval concepts of high treason, which I think is some people may, if you don't really know what that is when you specifically go against the king, when you try and overthrow the king or something like that. So that's high treason, as opposed to petty treason. Petty treason is where you kill your lord of a household. High treason is where you try to kill a king or you do kill a king, right? Um, and this concept didn't just originate from the belief in divine right of kings to rule. That's kind of something else. That's, God has appointed you as ruler of a nation, therefore you are this, well, whatever the nation actually means at this point, because nationhood's something else. But like this is also derived directly from the idea as the husband as the head of the household, not the other way around. So the king is perceived as being special and perceived as being this really important person because there is already a concept for that. And the concept for that is within the patriarchal family structure. So you have this idea of the husband, the wife, the servants, if you're in sort of a noble household, and the people below you in a very strict hierarchical structure. And that's where you get this idea of kingship from, as well as from your religious beliefs. But your religious beliefs, your religious texts are being read and interpreted within the context of your political context, within the context of your cultural norms, right? You're not inventing stuff in a vacuum. You're not reading stuff in a vacuum. You're not interpreting things in a vacuum. Your understanding of your world comes from everything around you, and it all interacts together. So when we come to medieval Wales, um, this looks very different to the way that different parts of medieval Europe looked, especially the Normans who came over sort of 1066 and all that, did the conquest of England, went, all right, lads, let's look across the border, heard something about pan-Britannic primacy, thought we'd give that a go. Um, and they came to medieval Wales and they were like, oh, you guys, what are you doing? What is this? And it was very different. So Normans and indeed the Anglo-Saxons, they kind of meshed quite well in terms of cultural. They sort of understood each other, at least. They had a basis. They kind of had some of the same sorts of cultural touchstones. But Medieval Wales didn't. So, for example, the Normans practiced patrilineal primogeniture, which meant the oldest son inherits everything. And that's just how it is. That's why you have an heir and a spare. You need your spare in case your heir dies. You ideally have three kids because, well, you have as many kids as you can essentially because child mortality is very high. So to combat that, you have many children. You expect a number of them not to survive, which is a tragedy still within the family, but it is an accepted thing that is it's sort of a risk that you run. So you have your oldest son, he gets everything, and then you're stuck with all of these other children that you've got, and you have to marry them off. You put them into the church so that you can have some power in the ecclesiastical sphere, and you can have some spiritual influence, for your family as well. You put them into the army, you put them into, you give them out to another family, and you say, hey, I know you don't have anyone to marry this son to, he's quite useless generally, but he can hold a sword. Can you do something with him, please? Um, and that's kind of how it works. But in Wales, it doesn't work like that. So in Wales, you have a situation where you're married to one woman generally, but concubines are normal. That's very weird for a Norman and for an Anglo-Saxon as well. That's not that's odd. And everybody's just kind of fine with it. And also, they're like, but why? They're very lax about same-sex encounters. It's kind of anachronistic at this point to talk about um, like gay relationships or gay as a concept. They don't have that concept. They don't have sexuality as an innate thing. It's considered so like basically everybody is kind of has the potential to be at least bisexual. And they wouldn't call it that either. It was just like, well, you can sleep with people. Does it really matter who that person is? And it was kind of like, it was just something anyone could do. And in fact, the church considered it a sin, but they considered it a sin that literally anyone could commit. So, and it was kind of like along those sorts of lines of like, well, anyone can masturbate, anyone can, sleep with somebody of the same sex. It's the same thing, right? And in Wales, they were just like, yeah, it happens. Sure. Um, and Norman churchmen in particular did not like that. They didn't understand it. They couldn't understand why the attitudes were so like meh, you know. Um, and they also had this thing of they didn't understand concubinage. They didn't understand the this sort of mentality, but they also didn't understand from a political perspective, and this is fair because this is madness, partible inheritance, which is the system where everything you have when you die gets split equally between every single child you have who you have acknowledged as being your child, regardless of who their parentage is, regardless of whether that is a legitimate relationship in the eyes of the law or in the eyes of the child, anyone. All you have to do is bring your kid and go, look, mate, this is your kid, do something. And then the Lord's like, oh yeah, that is my kid, yeah. And then that's acknowledgement in front of everybody, and that child then gets full rights as the same rights as a legitimate heir would, but only if the Lord acknowledges that the child is his. He does not have to. And then you have the situation of sort of public humiliation for the mother and the child, which often happened as well, where that you would bring your child to a public gathering and demand that the Lord acknowledge the child, and he just goes, no. And he may go no because he doesn't have space for more kids. Like, it's a situation where if you end up with seven legal heirs, all inheriting the same, there's only one bit of land that you can all get. And what happens when they decide, I want more than a seventh of this? I need more than a seventh of this. This isn't going to get me anything. And so they will start to kill each other off. And the reason that they can kill each other off is not just through kind of hunting accidents, someone cuts their head off while shaving, somebody else like accidentally trips and falls down a well. Like, um, they also have the backing of their foster family. So the fostering system is quite strong in Wales. And this is quite common as well outside in other parts of Europe, but the Welsh really went for it. So it's kind of where you create allies by giving your child to another family to raise as if they were their child. You would visit the kid, you would find out if that kid was being treated properly, if they're being treated fairly. But what happens in when you mix the fostering system up with partible inheritance is that you have a situation where one child doesn't just have a blood family, they have a network of alliances, of people they grew up with. So 5 or 6 kids that they grew up with from different families, all being fostered by one family, or the children of the foster family being like their siblings. And often, and that those foster parents and their network of alliances being more important kind of emotionally to that child than their blood family are, and being somebody they can call upon when they feel they're being ill treated or they feel that they're being, like mistreated by other people or their own siblings. So if they go to war with a brother that they've never really met, apart from a few times a year, who also wants their land, you have these foster families coming out to fight for the kids that they have fostered, right? So you have your own private army almost before you've even got anywhere, because you have this massive network of people that you can draw upon to say, look, I want not just a seventh, I want all of it. So 6 of my brothers have to die. Right, that's where we are. We're going to go to war. And if we win, I will give you and your kids this thing. I will do this for you, So you're building all of this, and this is how it works. And this is completely like the Normans just looked at this and went, this is completely mental. What are you doing? Like, what are you doing? But they also went, that's really good because we can volunteer to fight for one of you guys, and then we just we'll conquer the land for you, and then we just won't leave. Great, that works for us. Sucks to be you. And that's literally how they started conquering little bits of Wales. And as long as they could hold what they've conquered, you couldn't get rid of them. And that was kind of, so that's sort of medieval Wales, right? So that's but this is a completely different type of family system. It's a completely different type of culture. It's got its pros and cons, and it's got quite a lot of political consequences, and it's got family consequences, it's got personal consequences. There's so much going on. But you can see how you can develop that or take bits away from that and think about actually what does family look like when it's not just mum, dad, and a couple of kids? When it's a little bit more even than an extended family of like mum, dad, mum's parents, dad's parents, some brothers and sisters, so aunties and uncles. What does it look like when it's, multiple families with networks of alliances, and they all have different sexual politics. They all have, some of them might have concubines, and you might have like your foster father's favorite concubine is more important to you than his sort of legal wife. And then, she's in a same-sex relationship with another concubine, and like that would be normal and fine. And then like, how do you bring all of that in, and what are the to somebody's development, to somebody becoming aware of their cultural norms and thinking actually, yeah, this is fine. And then what are the consequences of that, for the plot, for the story? How would that work out as you're building these ideas? Yeah, so family structures. Let's have a brainstorm about different queer family structures you'd like to see in your fictional community that you're building. We're going to think about a few things. We're going to think about rural versus urban contexts, because this is going to look very different. And also, depending on time period that you're putting in, that's going to look very different as well. Monogamy versus non-monogamy, pros and cons of each one. There's no such thing as a perfect family structure. There is no such thing as a perfect family. There is no such thing as a perfect political system. There is no such thing as a perfect person. And that's where it all comes down to, right? So you've got pros and cons of multiple things. So you need to think about that as well. Also, let's think about asexual and aromantic inclusion, what that might look like, and how we can make that inclusive rather than make it a romantic normative or even a sexually normative society where the assumption is you will have a sexual relationship. The assumption is you will fall in love. What does that look like if you don't have those ideas, if you don't have those pressures? What does it look like, even if it's basically like your grandmother not asking you when you're going to get married, when you're going to have kids, like at every family gathering? Turkey. Um, so yeah, let's have a think about that. So first of all, let me just move this out of the way just for a second so I can read my own screen. So first of all, in any society, when we're thinking about rural and urban contexts, you do also have to think about um, things like mortality rates. We do have to think about practical things like how does the society feed itself? How does the society keep alive? How is it keeping children alive? How is it keeping parents, mothers particularly alive? So does it know things about infection? Does it know about how to protect newborn infants against various diseases that they might pick up? And let's not forget also that it's not actually disease that is the top cause in medieval societies of child death. It's actually drowning. And it's which is odd. Like you wouldn't necessarily think that, but toddlers wander off and then things happen, and they always usually have mill ponds and streams near villages, and you just have to take your eye off them for 2 minutes. And that was literally one of the top causes of infant mortality at that time. Um, so that's one of the things that maybe we need to think about. And in rural contexts, there's so many dangerous things. There's machinery if you're at that level. Even today, like I grew up in a sort of Welsh rural area, and we used to have PSA videos, like public service announcement videos, which were absolute like nightmare fuel about how dangerous farm machinery was and how you don't go across train tracks and all of that kind of stuff. And in the 1970s, there was the Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, which was a public service film that was basically somebody dressed as the Grim Reaper standing over a pond where some kids were playing and being like, I am the spirit of dark and lonely water. And I think that was the American equivalent of like, it's 10 o'clock, do you know where your children are? But it was like basically telling kids, don't play here, don't do that, don't touch that, it will kill you. We will show you in graphic detail in this video why. Um, and you can find them on YouTube. If you don't believe me, do have a look. But yeah, so have a think about how your society keeps people alive, but also how they are, um, if even in a queer normative society, you need to have couples that are having kids. Okay, like that's just a fact. So it's why a lot of agrarian societies prize fertility very highly, and that's just a natural thing that people do. Is like we need people to farm, we need people to keep this village going, to keep this community going. So, and the more kids you have, the better for your village. So, how do you circumvent the expectations to get paired off and have more kids What does a society look like where the expectation is missing or genuinely treated as optional? Because people will have children regardless, right? The expectation is a very social thing. Um, and how does that change the flow of conversations, assumptions, and life choices that people can make in these societies? So I think those are things that we're going to have a little think about, um, versus urban communities. Very different things come into play in an urban community than in a rural community. More movement in and out, so there's more push-pull for an urban society than there is in a small village who see very few strangers a year versus a town where maybe hardly anyone knows each other for various reasons. Urban communities may not be very close knit. Um, they may be very close knit if they have certain different populations or different demographics that kind of clump together. Um, you might have a town that is a very, very ancient town that has traditional groups of, say, like occupational groups like guilds, and that's how you get to know people, and that's how you it may have a lot of immigration to that particular town, to that particular city, and you may find communities from different places kind of going, ah, yeah, you're from the same place as me. We have this in common. And that's a very normal thing. But that's very different to a rural community. So how might queer normative urban societies operate? Where do people meet each other? And also, it's an interesting thing. What's missing from the urban landscape if if queer normativity is just an accepted thing? So, like, would you have queer specific spaces in a place where you don't need to have them because you don't need a safe space to be queer because everywhere is safe to be queer? So what would that look like? How would that come into play for things like urban planning? Do you know what I mean? Like, so we can have a think about that. So it depends where your book is going to be set, where your story's set, but you might find a queer person coming from a village going into an urban town in your world and being really like a fish out of water. Not because they don't feel safe in an urban society, or not because an urban person going into a village doesn't feel safe because they're queer, but because the ways of being queer or the ways that the society operates would be completely different. And that's kind of like your normal rural versus urban thing. That wouldn't disappear, but it might look different depending on how you decide you're going to set up these societies as you're going along. So there might be things that people go, oh, I would just took this for granted, but this is not at all what you don't do that. That's confusing me. And so you would still get misunderstandings and so on. So I think you've got a lot of conflict and stuff to build in. Um, but it's just a different way of thinking about it. So moving to queered relationships then. In some cultures, it's considered necessary to have multiple wives or multiple husbands, which is polyandry. So there's Tibetan fraternal polyandry, for example, is a thing. Um, and that's just where a woman might marry a husband and then also her husband's brother at the same time. And fairly, that's, yeah, that's something that they do. In other countries, having multiple wives could be preferred in order to have more children or more dowry or more land or whatever it is. And then you have structures within that where the wives group together. Again, be very careful with cultural appropriation if you're looking into these kinds of structures. But this also happened, as I say, in medieval Wales. Concubinage was quite normal. So that's something that you can look back at as well. If you can't find it in your culture right now, you can look back at your own history. You can look back at your own heritage and see how people dealt with these sorts of things at different points in time. And sometimes it's very surprising what you find when you look quite far back and you're like, oh, I didn't think of that, you know. Also formal versus informal relationship structures. So what's the difference? What do people bring into a formal union, and what makes a formal union? Um, and why? Are we going down sort of the marriage route, which is that very, let's face it, very pagan Roman thing? People get very upset when I say that. Giving rings is a pagan Roman tradition as well, which is, you know, people think that's like a, you know, that sort of idea of it being very Christian normative, but it has its basis in something else. I find that really interesting. But yeah, but okay, are we going the Roman route? Are we going down that the Greek monogamy? Are we what are we doing? Um, uh, how does it align to societal values? Who might prefer monogamy over polygamy or polyandry or polyamory, and why? Um, And in your society, then, because again, not perfect, how are people viewed if they exist outside these structures as single childless people or as a single person with children? And why are they viewed in that way? And you don't have to make this a utopia, right? A queer normative society does not equal utopia. It does not equal dystopia. It is just a thing. It is just a society that you are building around the story that you're writing. And it's a way of thinking about it so that you don't fall back on your own cultural norms when you have a gap in your world building. Because I see this quite a lot, and I think that's a really interesting. It's totally valid to do that if you're not, you know, if the world building is you've done that part, and then there's just something you're like, oh well, you know, I'm going to mention something, and it's like, yeah, mum, dad, kids, family, done, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Um, but if you want to go a little bit deeper with it, and you really like the world building part, and you aren't scared of the world building perhaps changing things about your plot, changing things about your character's motivations, changing things about the way that your character sees the world, and bits of things that would have developed your character's personality quite early on. If you're not scared of that and you hold everything a little bit lightly, then this sort of stuff is really good to dig into because it stops you from filling gaps in your world building knowledge by just falling back on your own cultural norms that you have in your head as deeply embedded, normalized things that you don't even know you have, right? So this is where your unconscious bias comes out as a writer, is where, you know, you kind of haven't thought much about certain aspects. Again, that's fine. But you've kind of there, I've read some books where it's like, ah, yes, this is US evangelical culturally with a different funny hat on and a bit of an accent. Like and I'm like, that's fine, because that's obviously where the writer is coming from. But maybe that book could have been a better book if if that writer had kind of gone deeper with something. I'm not picking on any specific book, any specific writer. This is just, you know, this is just nearly 40 years of reading stuff, you know, like this isn't, I'm not picking on anyone, I promise. So let's go into the brainstorming section. I've given 5 minutes, but we'll see what time that we actually have. I could give you more. Uh, but I'd like you to pick either a rural or an urban community or whatever your space equivalent is if you're writing sci-fi. So I don't know, like planetary, off-world, whatever. Um, and you might even have urban versus rural on a planet, but that might look very different depending on what you've got going on. So I'll just leave that to you, right? And I want you to brainstorm the different family structures that you could find there. So not necessarily the ones that your main character is coming from or your side character, but like just what are the range of family structures that you think you could find in your community? So, right, that's your first task. So we'll set a timer. Let's go. Pause, 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 pause. Yay, welcome back. Uh, okay, welcome back. I hope you found that really fun. I hope you found that kind of thoughtful, thought-provoking rather than thoughtful, sorry. Um, Next thing we're going to do is look at naming patterns. I hope that we have enough time to do this because I don't know how much time we have left. Uh, names, basic things that tell you so much about your character. So, surnames, occupational names. Originally, people's surnames are occupational. They come from things things they did, jobs that they got, baker, carpenter, cook, right? Um, Odd names that we don't have anymore because the jobs are gone, but the name still survives and you don't know what that relates to, like I don't know, like Muringer or something. Um, so how does that translate into an urban environment where there's the same job, but a lot of people do it? how how would that work in, like nicknames you could use. Uh, Nicknames are quite good. They become surnames as well. So it's like so and so or whatever. Um, I don't think we ever got my favorite in the Doomsday Book is Roger Fuck by the Navel, and I don't think that that ever became a legitimate surname anywhere in the world. I feel like we've lost something culturally, guys, from that. So yeah, if that's how you're going about it, I think that would work great. Locatives. Many people also use place where they were born, or where not just where they were born, but Normans changed their names depending on the bits of the world they'd conquered, which is where the Wallace family comes from. So the Wallaces are the De Wallensis of Wales. They're not of Wales, they're Normans, and they conquered a bit of Wales. They changed their name to De Wallensis to kind of make sure, which is the Latinized version, to show that they had conquered a bit of this place. They were kicked out about 10 years later. That doesn't matter. They still got the name. And then a few more people came over, took exactly the same name, different family, and then they ended up as Wallace. And that's the same thing as so when you see the Wallaces in Scotland, they are a Norman family with the surname Wallace because they conquered a bit of Wales and they're nothing to do with Wales at all, right? So this is how names evolve. And like you can take names from different places that are important to you or places that you've been that have resonated with you. And you're like, I'm no longer of this place, I'm now of this place. So names can change, they can be fluid. Patronymics and matronymics. This would be your father or your mother's first name, not their surname. And you would take their first name and put it on as like, so you've got Mac, son of, Ap in Wales, son of, the O in Ireland, right? And so it goes on. If we're doing a queer normative society, though, that might be a bit tricky because you may have a lot of different people that you could take that name of. You could choose not to take the name of your biological mother or father. You might want to take the name of, the person who is part of their polycule or foster your foster parents or you know, something like that. So how do you choose a name for yourself? How are you named by somebody else? Um, and what are the norms that you have? So those are just three types of names. You can have other types of surnames as well, but we don't have the time. So I went with those three as the most common. Um, naming your character. What happens if a character doesn't know where they're from and they can't provide a locative name in an area where locative names are normal? How would they be treated? If a character has three people they consider father figures and they want to honour all of them in their choice of surname, how might they go about that? If the character is caught on the wrong side of enemy lines and their name is a dead giveaway, how do they choose a new one to hide where they're from that makes sense to them? And how would they feel about having to use a different naming system? If a character lives in a society where names communicate status, how might that work? Or what happens if your character is low status in this society? What sort of name might they have? If a character lives in a place where names describe multiple relationships, so it's a descriptor of the kinds of relationships that they are part of, what relationships exist in their family structure and how would that be used to name them? So I want you to pick one of these bullet points for 10 minutes and figure it out. If you then figure it out and you're like, okay, I'm going to move on to a next one, you can pick as many of these as you want. But I'm going to give you 10 minutes and we'll think about naming some characters. Okay. And then pause, pause, pause. Coming back, welcome back. So I think we've more or less come to the end of our time, but I've got some homework for you. If you want to go away from this workshop with something else to think about, as if I haven't given you enough to think about, how did we get here? Societies are not born in vacuums. They are born from layers and layers and layers of human history. That includes religious history, political history, cultural history, development, so many things, not one event that sparks everything off, even if that's the story they tell. That's never actually how it happens. It's the layers around core things, right? And there are so many ways that a society could become queer normative and accepting and inclusive. And you will find a lot of these reasons mythologized and explored in their storytelling, their legends, their religious development. You would see that reflected in it. If a society doesn't make any distinction between queer lives and cishet lives, sexuality and gender are not something anyone really thinks about or focuses on. That doesn't mean this is a utopia. I've said that quite a lot, but I just want to underline this for you because all stories have some sort of element of conflict. It's very often human conflict, right? So what are the issues with this society? Where are its fault lines and lines of division if there aren't any, because that could still be race. It could still be disability. It could still be different marginalizations within that society. That doesn't go away. People don't stop oppressing each other just because they don't mind that somebody is trans or they don't mind that that's normal, that's fine. Doesn't matter that Auntie Pam is a lesbian, nobody cares. That doesn't mean that Auntie Pam isn't also a raging racist, right? Like this is not, this doesn't take away other things. So who is oppressed and what factors into their oppression? Even if you're not writing that story, it's worth thinking about these details. So it could be, I mean, it depends. Like if you're doing a sci-fi story, what's the human android, human robot relationship? What's humans and animals? What's going on there? Like how are certain people treated? Like, like I don't know. Humans and I don't know, maybe the animals speak now. I don't know. I'm thinking specifically of the Cordwainer Smith books where There's the under people, which are kind of like, I think this is actually the origin of the cat girl in sci-fi. And so he was writing stories in the, oh, I want to say 50s or 60s. And he had this idea of animals being mutated into people, but they were still like cat people or dog people or eagle people or, whatever. And they were the oppressed in the society that they were in, and they were considered the underclass of people. And his short stories are kind of like the civil rights movement of the under people. And there's a cat girl called Kamel, and she's a sex worker and various other things, and she is one of the heroines of the books, which is really quite progressive for a story that's written in the 50s and 60s. But yeah, so I would recommend Cordwainer Smith's short stories. They are deeply sad, but that's very interesting. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Why has your society got these divisions and issues and yet doesn't, but those divisions and issues don't include queerness? How has that normativity been constructed? What are the knock-on effects? So those are things also that we need to think about, but that's homework. Unless we have some extra time at the end, in which case, take it away. But yeah, that's all for now. That's all from me.
Awesome. That is just fascinating. It's so, I come from a communication background, so I always start with that sense of identity and that sense of culture. So it is totally clicking. And we often don't think of those things when we're creating the worlds. And I love looking at worlds as characters in our stories because they influence so much. So we have got a lot of homework for us to do. There has been so much fascinating information, and even something as simple as the word family was so powerful. So thank you so much, CM, for that. I hope everybody has enjoyed it. We've got time now in the chat so we can go ahead and answer and do that homework and work on those questions. But when we reach the end of our time, make sure that you guys are always thinking forward and always thinking outside of the box and seeing how it is that our worlds and our cultures influence the way our stories and characters are living. So if you like other things, check out our schedule, check out other Write Hive programs that we've had in the past. But it has been such a pleasure. Now, before we kind of sign off, CM, I know you had all your socials listed at the very beginning of your slides, and we'll post them again in the chat. Remind us, where can we follow you? What do you have coming up next?
Okay, so you can follow me on Blue Sky at cmrosens.com. Really easy. That's also my website. So my website is the best place to sign up for. You can sign up for my newsletter. There's a newsletter tab and menu. Or you can sign up for my posts, which I do author spotlights once a week, pretty much every week through the year. I'm closed for 2026 because I've got so many authors. But I'm opening again in November for 2027. So if you're an author and you would like to have your work spotlit and you want an interview opportunity, I do that for free. I just like doing it. So please feel free to drop me a comment on my website, which again, cmrosens.com in the contact page. And we can have a chat about that. And I'm not open again until November. So if you do, just pencil me in then and come back to me. You can follow me on Threads, Instagram, TikTok at cm.rosens. So yeah. And as for what's coming out, I have no idea right now. There are several things that I am working on, but I have so much out at the moment already. So I've got two books out with Canelo. I've got a lot of indie stuff as well. And you can buy things direct from my Ko-fi shop, which is kofi.com/cmrosens. That's easy. And you can sign up for a membership there. And I tell you what I do have coming out, which is something I do every month, is my Ko-fi stuff, which is just a monthly piece of short fiction that you get every month from me. And if you join at the higher tier, I post it out to you old school in a letter.
Oh.
So yeah, so if that sounds like fun, If you've read The Crows or 13th or any of those, I often write letters in character from some of the characters in the book. And it's non-canonical and it's just fun. But I also give you exclusive short stories set in that world, and also set in other fantasy worlds as well. So that's my membership. So that's what you can, that's yeah, that's the next thing that's coming out because it comes out every month. But
Great. Well, we are at our limit. Thank you guys so much for joining in. Any other questions, make sure to drop them in the chat. CM, you have been a delight and just amazing. A lot of so wild information that I always soak in. And so this is totally my jam. I'm so glad I was able to moderate on this one. And I was here to learn all of this and get the sneak peek before everybody else. But thank you guys so much. That is the end. We will see you on the board.